The NFL season is just a few weeks away, so today let's talk about my 5 biggest contenders in the AFC. So as I mentioned, we're going to be doing our top 5 contenders in the AFC, but before I get into that list, let's go ahead and talk about 2 honorable mentions. The 2 honorable mentions that I'll be bringing up in today's video will be the Cleveland Browns and the Miami Dolphins. For Cleveland, I think it's a pretty obvious route for you to make it a serious contention this upcoming season. I think you have to have Deshaun Watson play like 2020 Deshaun Watson. When Watson was with the Houston Texans, he was a top 10 quarterback in the league, and I think right now the ceiling for the Browns is extremely limited if Watson does not return to form. If Watson does somehow return to form, this is a really good contending team, but I don't know, as of right now, I can't put them in my top 5. And then next to the Miami Dolphins, I think anytime when you have an offense that is as potent as the Miami Dolphins, I think it does mean that you're going to be a contender. Yes, I have some question marks about the offensive line and some of the pieces on the defense, but I think when you have as much talent as this Dolphins team, you always have a chance. But with that all being said, if you go on to enjoy today's video, make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button because that would mean a lot to me. But let's hop into the list. Starting off at number 5, I'll be talking about the New York Jets. Now, I might be a little bit higher on the Jets than a lot of other people because whenever I talk about the Jets, I typically get a lot of comments confused as to why I put the Jets in any sort of positive video. But I think the truth of the matter is with the New York Jets is they're a really talented team. And as long as they get like 75% of what Aaron Rodgers typically is, which might be a stretch at this point, but I think it should be the expectation for them to get to that point, then I think this team actually has a legitimate chance to be a really big threat to the Kansas City Chiefs within this conference. Because last year, with probably the worst quarterback in the NFL, they were actually a competent team and were able to be a little bit hard to get by for a couple really good rosters. Hell, just ask the Kansas City Chiefs when they had a duel with Patrick Mahomes versus Zach Wilson, where Zach Wilson outperformed Patrick Mahomes. And no, that's not a compliment to Zach Wilson. He got carried in that game because the defense was just freaking awesome that day. But I think that game tells you a lot about what you can expect this upcoming season, assuming that this team can stay healthy, which is a pretty big assumption. I think defensively speaking, you're looking at a unit that is arguably the best or maybe a top 5 unit defensively. And I think as long as the offense can, number 1, stay healthy, and number 2, effectively run the football, we're talking about an offense that could be around top 15-ish. And if you give this top 5 defense a top 15 level offense, this team's ceiling is extremely high. How do I think this team is going to be a serious contender? Likely not. I think every team above the Jets in this list are serious contenders. I just don't think the Jets are quite yet serious yet. But I think if this team can put a lot of the pieces together and look really awesome maybe halfway through the season, they could maybe elevate themselves up to being considered a serious contender. But I think with all the question marks surrounding the health of Aaron Rodgers, the health of some of their pieces offensively and some pieces defensively, I can't quite move them up any higher than 5th on my list. But if this team can somehow just manage to stay healthy and play competent football, this is such a good team. Coming in at number 4, I'm going to be talking about the Houston Texans, who finally have become a contender within the AFC, which is just such a crazy thing to say. Because it was literally just 2 years ago when this team was picking 2nd overall in the draft, where they got CJ Stroud, and now all of a sudden they're this really good team. And I think you got to give a credit to a lot of different pieces on this roster, whether it's the general manager and the owner or the head coach or the quarterback. You just got to give a lot of praise and credit to a lot of people for getting this team to this point. With that being said though, the pressure is now on for this Texans team to execute and perform at a very high level. You have a franchise-altering quarterback in CJ Stroud who has played fantastic football thus far throughout his career. And now that he's on a super cheap contract, the expectations are to build a championship winner around Stroud to get the Houston Texans to a Super Bowl. Now, it's not an easy path to get there because you have a lot of really good teams within this division and within the conference. But I do think the Houston Texans thus far have done all the right moves to get this team to that point. This offseason, they fixed up a lot of pieces defensively by bringing in some studs like Danielle Hunter and Azeez Al-Shaair. And offensively speaking, you traded for Stephon Diggs and Joe Mixon to add some experience to this offense. And I think with a fully healthy offensive line and some improvements defensively, this Houston Texans team has positioned themselves to be one of the better teams in the AFC and likely the best team within their division, meaning they'll likely get home field advantage in the playoffs. I think if they can manage to stay healthy and similar to the New York Jets, if about mid-season they really start to pick their stride up, we're talking about a team that could head into the playoffs with a lot of confidence, especially off of what they did last year. And if Stroud can continue to build off of what he did last year, we're talking about an MVP level quarterback. So if those two things happen, which I think are pretty realistic things, this Texas team could go extremely far in this year's playoffs, and who knows, maybe they'll represent the AFC in the championship game. But coming in at number 3, we'll be discussing the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, I had a really hard time positioning both the Bengals and the Texans here. If you want to flip the two and put the Bengals at 4 and the Texans at 3, I don't necessarily disagree with you, but for this video, I trust what I've seen from the Cincinnati Bengals thus far throughout their short little stint of being relevant, more so than the Houston Texans, because I've seen a larger sample size from the Bengals, and I've also seen a higher upside with them making it to a Super Bowl, whereas Houston hasn't quite done so. So that's kind of my mini reasoning as to why I put the Bengals slightly above the Houston Texans. Now, I will say this, I think if you're comparing roster to roster, you can make a legitimate argument that the Houston Texans have a better roster, but for the sake of the video, let's just focus on the Cincinnati Bengals here. When it comes to the Bengals, similar to the Jets, a lot of their struggles last year were just really pointed at the fact that they had a bunch of injuries and that Joe Burrow was never 100% this past season. I think if you get a 100% healthy Joe Burrow, a 100% healthy Jamar Chase, with all the improvements on the offense and some of the small improvements defensively, I really like the Geno Stone signing, by the way. I think this team could be pretty awesome next year. Now, it's not going to be easy for them because they're probably playing in the best conference in the league, in the AFC North, and having to get through those teams 6 times a year is going to be mentally and physically draining for this team. Not to mention the rest of the AFC is extremely difficult, and because there's so many good teams in this division, it's going to be hard for the Bengals to get home field advantage, so that's kind of another thing that could potentially hold them back. But I've seen this team just 3 years ago make it all the way to the Super Bowl and put up a fight against the LA Rams, and I have to believe that they're going to be able to manage to put something like that out there this upcoming season. I believe that Joe Burrow is a top 5 quarterback in the league. I think Jamar Chase is kind of becoming an underrated receiver 1 in the league, not to mention you still have T. Higgins and a number of other fantastic players. I loved the Zach Moss signing. I think he's going to be an awesome running back for this offense and something that they haven't had in quite some time. And I think with all the improvements this team has made, this team is set to have a pretty big bounce back season this upcoming year. Now, what is a realistic expectation for this Bengals team? I don't really know quite yet because of how bad they were at certain points last year because of injuries. But if we can make the assumption and just hypothetically say that they are healthy next year, I think this is going to be a really awesome team that could put up a fight against any top contender. But coming in at number 2, we'll be discussing the Baltimore Ravens, the same division member of the Cincinnati Bengals. This is going to be an absolute battle between those two teams, not to mention the Browns and the Steelers for that division. But of those 4 teams, I do think the Ravens are the most likely to win it. And I think a big reason why I have that mindset is because of how much faith and belief I have in Lamar Jackson. I know Lamar hasn't been perfect in the playoffs, but I think a lot of his playoff problems are a little bit overblown at this point. I think I've seen enough of a sample size from Lamar Jackson to be able to believe in him long term and think that he's going to be fine in this year's playoffs and beyond. And I think this is probably one of his better rosters he's had throughout his career. I don't know quite yet if it's better than last year's roster because of how good and dominant that defense was. But when you bring in a guy like Derrick Henry, it definitely does at least propose the question of whether or not this is a better team than it was last year. But I think as long as the team is on the same lines as it was last year, I think this team is easily the second best team in this conference. The only thing that held them back last year was one half of really poor football against the Chiefs, and had they performed better in that first half and just didn't screw things up in the second half, they may very well have been in the Super Bowl last year. And so if we assume that this team does take some steps forward and the addition of Derrick Henry does present a new option for this offense, I think this team is going to be really good next year. Now again, it's really hard to say if they're a better team this year than they were last year. They kind of remind me in some ways to like the San Francisco 49ers, where they brought in some members but also lost some members, and they're kind of confusing as to whether they'll be better or worse. But I think when you're getting compared to the 49ers, you're a pretty awesome team, so I do believe the Ravens are the second on this list. But we all know who's going to be number 1. It is, of course, the back-to-back Super Bowl champions, the 3-time Super Bowl champion Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. I've been seeing some comments in my comment section asking me to make a positive video on the Kansas City Chiefs because typically when I talk about them, I'm talking about different teams that could potentially take them down. But Chiefs fans, let's just be honest here. You guys have gotten so much praise from everyone in the national media, rightfully so, that at this point it's becoming a little bit redundant, and there's really no reason for me to put out a video as to explain why the Chiefs are this fantastic monster of a team. team, because we all know how good you guys are. You guys have the best quarterback in the league, the best tight end in the league, one of the best defenses in the league, an improving offensive line every single day, and hell, you got some brand new receivers. The one thing that we can point fun of you guys at was your receiving corps, and now you guys have fixed that issue, so you guys are just ridiculously good. There's no reason for me to make a video. But as a substitute to not making you guys a video, you guys can take this video and use it as your Chiefs video for the offseason. Let's talk about the Chiefs. You guys are awesome. You guys have every single piece that you guys could ever ask for, as I mentioned earlier. You guys have all the confidence in the world, and you're going into this season with really nothing to prove, which might be the scariest version of the Chiefs, because I kind of think the Chiefs play better when they're just playing free football with no real concern, which is what they're going to be doing this upcoming season, because they're back-to-back champions and they have Patrick Mahomes who can get them out of basically every situation imaginable. So while you have every single team trying to figure out how to beat you, you are the team that everyone's trying to beat, and you've already beaten them, and you've already proven that you're the superior team over and over again. And yeah, Cincinnati will be healthy this year. Houston will be better. The Jets will be better. The Browns, the Dolphins, the Bills, they're all going to be better, but you're still clearly 10 times better than a lot of those teams. And yeah, I do think the Ravens and the Bengals and the teams I've mentioned in this video can be competitive with the Chiefs, and hell, maybe they'll beat them this year. But when it comes down to it, in a one-on-one, one-drive type of game, I'm taking Patrick Mahomes every single time. He's the best quarterback in the league, and it's really not even up for debate. And when you have a mastermind like Andy Reid, it makes this team that much more unstoppable. So to be honest with you guys, I do expect the Chiefs to win a third straight championship. They're a franchise that has every piece imaginable, and really the only thing that could cost them from winning a third championship in a row would probably be their own mistakes. If this team goes out there and just kind of messes around with their food in the playoffs, maybe they could get caught up with a team that they probably shouldn't get caught up with. And really the only other way this team is probably not going to win a third championship is if injuries do somehow happen, but this has typically been a pretty healthy team. So yes, it won't be an easy road, and yes, I could easily see a world where the Chiefs don't win a championship this year, but if I was a betting man, which I actually am a betting man, I would put money on the Chiefs, which I probably will at some point. But alright, that is my list. If you guys agree or if you disagree, let me know in the comment section below. And if you do disagree, let me know with your list, and I'll make sure to comment to your comments. And if you enjoyed the video, as I said earlier, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.